Before we get into the video, I need you guys to do me a favour. Number 1, like the video. Also comment, let me know your thoughts on the case. Now Glasgow's James McCann, better known as the name Jasper, is often regarded as one of the most feared enforcers / gangsters that have ever tread on Scottish land. He was the person that nightmares were made out of. When you define a character such as Jasper, words such as psychopath, maniac and unhinged and a fierce gangster come to mind, but then people who actually know him have described James McCann as a brother, a leader, fiercely loyal and intelligent. Now growing up in the Springboig area, the east side of Glasgow, the deprived area was known for things like murders, drug dealing and extortion. So it was no surprise that James McCann was no stranger to struggle and hardship, of eating one meal a day and sometimes staying in a 3-bedroom home devoid of electricity and heating. Raised by his 2 brothers, James McCann was never lonely, and he quickly established himself as a person not to be messed with. This was because he had no fear, no idea that people were not supposed to settle their differences with a weapon or their fists, because he had never seen people talk it out. So armed with a blade, James McCann often helped himself to things like copper wire, storm drains and other people's property, with no reprisal. At age 13 years old, James was then jailed for 4 years after he got into a brawl with another person. The victim was so badly injured that Scottish police arrested James for ABH, and then the judge sentenced him to a custodial sentence. James served just under 2 years at a Young Offenders Institute. And when James McCann was 24 years old, in 1997, James McCann was on a night out in Edinburgh. He had decided to go to Edinburgh because he felt it was more safe than Glasgow. Now, as the hardman was walking down Lothian Road, he found himself surrounded by a group of disorderly youths that just left the disco. They were sweaty, high and buzzing from alcohol. The swarm then surrounded James McCann and his wife from all angles. Now, the innocent victim, Stephen Walker, was separate from the crowd. In fact, he was just waiting for a taxi. Now, James McCann mistook Stephen Walker as a person who wanted to harm him when someone had bumped into James's back. So instinctively, James pulled out a blade and slashed Stephen across the face with so much ferocity that the wound went right down to the bone. Now, Stephen Walker needed 30 stitches to his face and also suffered permanent nerve damage. For this incident, James McCann was jailed for 7 years in Scots Prison, an establishment that already housed much of Scotland's serious criminals. The fact that James McCann served time only further established James as a gangster and his reputation, and he soon caught the attention of crime bosses in Glasgow and further afield, including one Tam McGraw. Now McCann, aka Jasper, had forged a relationship with serious criminals such as Paul Ferris and Tam Baggan, who was considered second in command in Arthur Thompson's gang. While serving his sentence in Scots Prison, James was ordered to stab the ex-bodyguard of crime boss Arthur Thompson, which showed he had no allegiance or loyalty. Now, armed robber Tam Baggan, rumoured had circulated that Tam Baggan was now working for the police as an informant or a snitch, and was even given police names of other gangsters and details of their drug operations, after he was disgruntled that he himself had been told off by known rivals for robbing cash in transit vans. Now, Tam Baggan was caught off guard when he was approached from behind in a workshop in B Hall. He was stabbed 3 times in slow and meticulous action before he collapsed to his knees in a pool of red. Of course, police staff rushed to the scene and an ambulance was called while prison officers worked to give emergency treatment. Tam Baggan had to undergo emergency surgery as soon as he reached the hospital. Now, after the incident, James McCann was put into seg, but to Tam Baggan's credit, he did not reveal the name of the person responsible that stabbed him or make any formal complaints. Now, after serving his sentence, James McCann, aka Jasper's criminal aspirations were back, and he once again offered his services to large criminal organisations. He did things like collecting drug debts, sending messages to other so-called gangsters, and of course, being a hitman. Now, his biggest benefactors were the Daniel crime family and also Edinburgh gangster Robert Kelby, after Robert Kelby had been asleep in his Rathole station home, and had been fired upon while him and his wife were in the house, along with the children. Now, it was alleged that the attempted M was ordered by Edinburgh drug lord Mark Richardson. Now, Robert Kelby had been shot at on 3 separate occasions in less than a year, forcing him to pack his bag and leave his home. Now, Jasper then became a person of interest in the cruel and callous murder of Glasgow's George Goofy Docherty. In August 2006, George was stabbed as he walked along Glenshie Street at 11:40 am, that's broad daylight. Now, George was known to police as this was the 3rd attempt on George's life in a 3-month span. George had been mowed down by an unknown hitman before he was stabbed multiple times. Now, George at the time was wearing a stab-proof vest, so the alleged killer had stabbed the 46-year-old's legs. He was then run over a further 3 times as he lay in the middle of the road, and tragically he was pronounced dead soon after. Now, even though James McCann was a person of interest and then a suspect in the fatal incident, police could not pin the crime on James because the reality was there was a long list of criminals that wanted George dead. He was known to supply guns to rivals and friends alike. He was also a dealer and a hitman himself, albeit not a very good one because information leaked as to who his target was. So, that same year, George Docherty was murdered. James McCann Albany Avenue home was raided after intel says that James had been storing a cache of weapons. On June 16th of 2006, Skyfdale police found submachine, a revolver, silencer and 18 rounds of ammo, along with tens of thousands of pounds in cash. Now, James McCann was jailed for 7 years. He was then ultimately released in 2011. Now, James was unequivocal when it came to his loyalty, that he even rearranged his cousin's face. In 2014, James's cousin, David Sattini, was a big-time dealer. He had cut and wholesaled £1.1 million worth of H from his tenement flat in Scotstoun. David had made millions of pounds from the drug trade, and he owned property in Scotland, Italy and Spain, and had a plethora of high-spec cars. Now, James thought that he was owed money due to David's drug dealing, so he lay in wait and caught David Santini and his mate outside the house in New Wharf Hill, Motherwell, at roughly 1:46 am. Now, James demanded that David sign over property to him and give him cash. David refused and attempted to walk past James and James's mate. Now, James, already known to carry a blade, then put the blade to his own cousin's face and then swiped in every which direction. David suffered an 8-inch slice to his cheek, as well as other slices across his face. Now, despite the fact that everyone in Scotland had heard the rumours as to what James had done to his own cousin, he was not charged by police because David refused to cooperate with them. And fast forward, in October 2017, Jasper, James's brother, 40-year-old Robert McCann, and a friend, 54-year-old Greg Bannerman, had armed themselves with ropes, gloves, mask, hammers, and also a wrench, and then attacked and held Paul Connor hostage. Now, the trio had found out that Paul Connor had been paid £6,600 during a crash that took place in 2016. Now, Paul was the passenger and Robert McCann was the driver, so the two were mates. But when Paul was paid the money for his injuries, Robert expected to be given some of that money. He was not, despite Paul giving his friends and family some of the cash. And of course, that left Robert McCann fuming, so of course he recruited his brother, the known enforcer. Now, Jasper found out that Paul Connor was travelling to a female friend's flat in Shettleston, so the trio raced over, making their way into the property before Paul Connor arrived. Now, once Paul arrived, he was ordered into the bedroom where he and Robert argued. Now, Robert demanded the cash. Paul Connor refused, so Robert pulled out a claw hammer and struck Paul on the ribs. He was also then jabbed in the face. Now, according to witnesses, Paul was heard screaming and writhing in pain. Paul was then bundled into a car, and then the terrified victim was taken to a second address in Airdrie. Once inside the property, Paul Connor was stripped down. He was then struck with a hammer and told repeatedly that he was going to die unless he handed over the money. His PIN and card was also demanded. Now, in a volatile ordeal that lasted 7 hours, Paul Connor was also choked. Now, during the brief intermission, Paul Connor actually jumped out of the bedroom window where he flagged down the general public for help. Now, Paul Connor told every single detail as to what happened to him and why he was held captive and who was responsible. Paul also testified at trial, so of course, James McCann was jailed for 8 years. His brother, Robert McCann, was jailed for 7 years. And right now, James McCann, better known as Jasper, Scotland's most dangerous enforcer, currently remains in jail, where his life is not sweet. Stay safe.